I wasn't invited to my best friend's bachelorette party because I wasn't the right fit. 6 months later, I hired her husband, and discovered every secret that was destroying their perfect marriage. Have you ever had that one friendship? The kind where you finish each other's sentences, where you've held each other's hair after too many tequila shots, where you've cried together through breakups and celebrated promotions? That was me and Natalie. 15 years of friendship, from awkward high school freshmen to supposedly mature 30-year-olds with careers and mortgages. We were inseparable. At least, that's what I thought until I found out I was the only one from our friend group not invited to her bachelorette weekend in Miami. Let me back up. My name is Rachel. I'm 32, work in HR for a tech company in Austin, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew what friendship meant. Natalie and I met in freshman biology when we were paired as lab partners. We bonded over our mutual hatred of dissecting frogs and our shared love of early 2000s pop punk. We went to different colleges but stayed close, texting daily and visiting each other whenever possible. After graduation, we both ended up back in Austin, and our friendship only grew stronger. Or so I believed. When Natalie met David 3 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. He seemed great, smart, successful, treated her well. As a finance director at a competing tech firm, he had the kind of career stability that had eluded most of the guys she'd dated before. I helped her pick out her engagement ring when he asked for suggestions. I was one of the first people she called when he proposed. And when she asked me to be one of her bridesmaids, not the maid of honor, but still, I was thrilled. The wedding planning was a whirlwind. Natalie had always dreamed of a perfect wedding, and with David's income combined with hers, they could afford to go all out. I noticed that as the months went by, she started hanging out more with her new work friends and the wives of David's colleagues. They were all into SoulCycle and clean eating and designer handbags, not exactly my scene, but hey, people grow and change, right? I didn't think much of it until Jessica, another bridesmaid and our mutual friend from college, called me one night. "Are you excited about Miami?" she asked. "Miami?" I replied, genuinely confused. There was an awkward pause. "The bachelorette weekend? Next month?" My stomach dropped. "I don't know what you're talking about." Another pause. "Oh my God, Rachel. I thought you knew. Natalie's bachelorette weekend is in 3 weeks. In Miami. I assumed you couldn't make it or something." I felt like I'd been punched. No, I wasn't invited. Jessica stumbled over her words. "That's weird. Everyone else is going. The whole bridal party, plus some of her work friends." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall. My mind raced through possible explanations. Was it a mistake? Did my invitation get lost? Was I supposed to be planning it as a bridesmaid? But deep down, I knew the truth. Natalie had deliberately excluded me. I called her the next day. My hands were shaking as the phone rang. When she answered, I tried to keep my voice casual. "Hey, Nat, Jessica mentioned something about Miami next month?" The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. "Oh," she finally said. "Yeah, about that." What followed was perhaps the most painful conversation of my adult life. Natalie explained, in that gentle, patronizing tone people use when they're trying to soften a blow, that the bachelorette weekend was going to be a certain vibe. That her work friends had planned it, and it was going to be all about luxury spa treatments, yacht parties, and fancy dinners. "It's just, you're not really into that stuff, Rachel. I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable or out of place. You wouldn't enjoy it. Translation: you're not glamorous enough. You don't fit with my new image. Plus," she continued, her voice growing slightly defensive, "you haven't exactly made an effort with my new friends. Every time I invite you to meet them, you always have some excuse." That wasn't fair. I had met her new friends, a group of perfectly highlighted, Lululemon-wearing women who talked endlessly about their husbands' promotions and their home renovations. I had tried to connect with them, but it was clear they viewed me as some sort of quirky curiosity with my vintage band t-shirts and my preference for dive bars over wine bars. I thought I'd be included because I'm your friend, I said quietly. Not because I fit some aesthetic. Natalie sighed. It's not like that. I want everything about the wedding to be perfect. You understand, right? I didn't understand. Not at all. But I said I did, because what else could I do? Make a scene? Demand to be included? Force my way into a weekend where I clearly wasn't wanted. I went to the bridal shower, plastering a smile on my face as I watched Natalie open expensive gifts from her new friends. I stood beside her at the wedding, wearing the overpriced bridesmaid dress that took 3 months of saving to afford. I gave a toast at the reception, telling funny stories about our friendship that suddenly didn't seem so funny anymore, and then, I quietly stepped back from Natalie's life. I stopped initiating texts. I declined invitations to group gatherings. I focused on my job, on my other friendships, on moving forward. 2 months after the wedding, an interesting opportunity landed on my desk. As the HR director, I oversaw all hiring for our rapidly growing company. We needed a new finance director, as ours was leaving for a startup. The job posting had been live for just 3 days when a familiar name appeared in my inbox. David Chen. Yes, that David. Natalie's husband. I stared at his resume for a long time. It was impressive, his qualifications were excellent, his experience aligned perfectly with what we needed. Under normal circumstances, he would have been an automatic interview, but these weren't normal circumstances. My first instinct was to recuse myself from the hiring process. Pass his resume to my colleague and explain the connection. That would have been the professional thing to do, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that lingering hurt from being excluded. Maybe it was just the simple desire to see what would happen. I scheduled the interview myself. Now, I want to be very clear, I had no malicious intent. I wasn't planning to sabotage David's chances at the job. If anything, I was genuinely curious about how he was doing, whether he and Natalie were happy in their new married life. We had always gotten along well, and he probably had no idea about the bachelorette party situation. The day of the interview arrived, and I made sure to be professional. I wore my best suit, prepared my standard questions, and welcomed him into the conference room with a warm smile. "Rachel," he exclaimed when he saw me. "What a surprise. Natalie didn't mention you worked here." I kept my expression neutral. "I've been here for 3 years now. Heading up the HR department." "That's fantastic," he said, though I detected a flicker of nervousness cross his face. "Small world, huh?" The interview proceeded normally at first. We discussed his experience, his management style, his vision for our finance department. He was articulate and knowledgeable, just as I remembered. But as the hour went on, David began to relax, perhaps lulled into a false sense of security by our prior connection. That's when things got interesting. "So, why are you looking to leave your current position?" I asked. It was a standard interview question, but his answer was anything but standard. David hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "Between us, the culture there has gotten toxic. My boss takes credit for my work, the hours are insane, and the stress is affecting my home life." He paused. "Natalie and I, well, the first year of marriage is tough, right? Especially when you're working 80-hour weeks." I nodded sympathetically, even as my mind filed away this information. "Trouble in paradise already?" "That sounds difficult. Work-life balance is something we value highly here." "That would be a welcome change," he admitted. "Things have been tense at home." After the formal interview questions, we chatted casually as I walked him out. That's when he really opened up. "How's Natalie doing?" I asked innocently. "I haven't seen her much since the wedding." David's expression clouded. "She's fine. Busy with work and her new friends. You know how she gets when she's focused on climbing the social ladder." I did know. It was precisely that behavior that had pushed me out of her life. "She's been spending a lot of time with the wives of my colleagues," he continued, an edge of bitterness in his voice. Weekend brunches, shopping trips, sometimes I feel like she married me for the social connections more than anything else. I made a sympathetic noise, encouraging him to continue. The wedding debt isn't helping either, he added, lowering his voice despite us being alone in the hallway. Don't tell Natalie I told you this, but we put almost $80,000 on credit cards for that wedding. The Miami Bachelorette weekend alone was over 15 grand. My eyebrows shot up. That's substantial. Tell me about it, he sighed. I'm hoping this position comes with a significant pay bump. We need it. By the time David left, my head was spinning. Not only had he shared intimate details about their marriage, details that Natalie would be mortified to know he'd divulged, but he'd unknowingly given me a window into a life that wasn't nearly as perfect as Natalie had been projecting on Instagram. I should have left it there. I should have passed his resume to another team member and stepped away from the hiring process. Instead, I scheduled a second interview. During the next few weeks, I learned more about Natalie and David's marriage than I ever should have known. I learned that they fought constantly about money. That Natalie's shopping habit had spiraled out of control as she tried to keep up with her new friends. That David resented her for pressuring him to buy a house they couldn't really afford in the right neighborhood. I learned that David's mother and Natalie weren't speaking after a blow-up during wedding planning. That Natalie had insisted they postpone having children until they achieved certain status symbols, the luxury car, the vacation home. That David suspected Natalie of flirting with his boss at company events to help his career. With each revelation, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Vindication that Natalie's perfect new life wasn't so perfect after all, guilt for listening to these private details, and a growing sense of power. Information is power, after all, and I now possessed information that could shatter the carefully curated image Natalie had built. The decision to hire David wasn't purely personal. He was genuinely the best candidate, and the team liked him. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a thrill when I called to offer him the position. A position that would put him directly in my orbit and further complicate Natalie's neat compartmentalization of her life. When David accepted the job, he was ecstatic. Natalie's going to be surprised, he said with a laugh. She always said you and I would never work in the same circles. Did she? I replied mildly. Well, things change. I expected some kind of reaction from Natalie when David told her the news. A text, perhaps, or even an angry phone call. Instead, there was nothing but silence. Until 3 days later, when she appeared in the lobby of our office building. She was impeccably dressed, as always, designer jeans, an expensive-looking blouse, hair and makeup flawless. The receptionist called me down, and I found Natalie pacing nervously by the entrance. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice tight. "Privately?" I took her to a small conference room and closed the door. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the weight of our fractured friendship hanging between us. "You hired David," she finally said. "We did," I replied. "He was the most qualified candidate." Natalie's eyes narrowed slightly. "Of all the companies in Austin, he just happened to apply to yours? And you just happened to be the one interviewing him?" I shrugged. "It's a small world sometimes." "What did he tell you?" she demanded, her composure cracking slightly. "About us? About me?" The fact that this was her first concern told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't worried about potential ethical conflicts or professional boundaries. She was worried about her secrets. "David was very professional during the interview process," I said carefully. "But," she pressed. "But nothing. He starts on Monday." I paused, then added, "Is there something specific you're concerned about him sharing?" Natalie's face flushed. "Don't play games, Rachel. You know exactly what you're doing." "Do I?" I leaned forward. "What am I doing, exactly? Offering a job to a qualified candidate? Or is there something else bothering you?" She stared at me for a long moment. "This is about the bachelorette party, isn't it? You're still upset about that?" The casual dismissal in her tone reignited all the hurt I'd been trying to process. "You excluded me from a major event because I didn't fit your image. After 15 years of friendship. So yes, that was hurtful. But this isn't about revenge, Natalie. This is about consequences. Consequences, she repeated, her voice rising slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I kept my voice level. It means that when you treat people like they're disposable, eventually they stop protecting your interests. It means that when you build your life on appearances rather than authenticity, that foundation gets shaky. Natalie's eyes widened. So he did tell you things. Personal things. People talk, Natalie. Especially when they're unhappy. She sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. What do you want? To tell everyone about our financial problems? To embarrass me in front of my new friends? To ruin my marriage? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Revenge had seemed so sweet in theory, but seeing Natalie's genuine distress gave me pause. Did I really want to hurt her? Would that heal my own hurt? I don't want to ruin anything, I said honestly. But I think you need to ask yourself some hard questions about the life you're building and the people you're pushing away to maintain it. Natalie looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. It's not as simple as you think. It never is, I agreed. But excluding people who care about you because they don't match your aesthetic. That's a choice, Natalie. And it has consequences beyond just hurt feelings. We sat in silence for a moment, 15 years of friendship hanging in the balance. I didn't tell you about the bachelorette party because I knew you'd judge me, she finally said. You've always had this way of making me feel less, somehow. Like my interests are shallow. Like wanting nice things and fitting in with certain people is something to be ashamed of. Her words stunned me. In all our years of friendship, she had never expressed feeling this way. That was never my intention, I said quietly. Maybe not, she conceded. But that's how it felt. And when I started making friends who didn't make me feel that way, I chose them. I know that hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But I'm not sorry for wanting a different life. Her honesty, however painful, shifted something in me. This wasn't the Natalie I thought I knew, the social climber, the status seeker. This was someone who had felt judged by me, perhaps for years, and had finally found the courage to break free. For what it's worth, I said, David is genuinely qualified for this job. I'm not going to make things difficult for him, or for you, at work. And whatever he's shared with me stays confidential. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. As she stood to leave, I had one last question. Are you happy, Nat? With this new life? She hesitated. Parts of it. Not all of it. She met my eyes. Are you happy? It was my turn to be honest. Parts of me. Not all of me. We looked at each other, really looked, for the first time in what felt like years. Maybe. She began hesitantly, maybe we could get coffee sometime? Just the two of us. No pretenses. The offer surprised me. After everything that had happened, did I even want to rebuild this bridge? Did she? I'd like that, I heard myself say. As I watched Natalie walk out of the building, I realized that revenge wasn't what I had been seeking after all. It wasn't about exposing her secrets or undermining her marriage. It was about being seen. About not being discarded like an outdated accessory that no longer matched her new aesthetic. David started work the following Monday. True to my word, I maintained professional boundaries and never alluded to the personal details he had shared. If he and Natalie were having problems, they didn't spill over into the workplace. Natalie and I did meet for coffee, and then again for dinner a few weeks later. Our conversations were tentative at first, both of us careful not to reopen old wounds. But gradually, we found our way back to something resembling friendship, not the inseparable bond we once had, but something new and perhaps more honest. One evening, as we were finishing dinner, Natalie looked at me thoughtfully. You know, you could have really hurt me with what you knew. You could have told my friends about our money problems, about the fights with David's family. You had all the ammunition you needed. I considered this. That wasn't what I wanted. What did you want? The question hung between us, and I realized I finally had an answer. I wanted to matter, I said simply. I wanted 15 years of friendship to count for something more than whether I fit an aesthetic for a weekend in Miami. Natalie nodded slowly. I made a mistake. A big one. And I almost lost one of the only people who's ever known the real me, not just the version I present to everyone else. The real you isn't so bad, I said with a small smile. She's actually worth keeping around. We split the check that night, a small but meaningful change from our old dynamic where I would always cover the more expensive places Natalie wanted to try. As we walked to our cars, she mentioned that she and David were starting counseling. That they were talking about downsizing to a smaller house, one they could actually afford. That she was learning to care less about what her new friends thought. I don't know if Natalie and I will ever recapture the closeness we once had. Some bridges, once damaged, are never quite the same when rebuilt. But I do know that hiring David, an action I took partly out of hurt and partly out of curiosity, ended up being a catalyst for something neither of us expected: growth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't exposing someone's secrets or tearing down what they've built. Sometimes it's simply holding up a mirror and giving them the chance to see themselves clearly. Perhaps for the first time, Natalie now sees the hollowness of the life she was so desperately trying to build. I see the ways in which I might have contributed to her feeling judged and inadequate. David sees that he deserves a partner who values him for more than his income and social connections. We're all still works in progress. But now, at least, we're progressing with our eyes open. So if you're struggling with a friendship that's changed, or feeling pushed aside for not fitting someone else's image, remember, true connection isn't about aesthetics or status. It's about seeing each other fully, flaws, insecurities, and all, and choosing to stay anyway. As for me, I'm no longer uninvited. But more importantly, I no longer need the invitation to know my own worth.
If you liked the story, subscribe to our channel and share your impressions in the comments. It's important for us to know which stories will be interesting to you. We try to post new stories every day.